Erik, Chapter 27. I reached out from where I had concealed myself, twisted into the cramped space under the bar of the Newton Hotel, and tugged on the trouser leg of the barkeep whom I had paid off to let me take his place. He showed no surprise, for of course he knew I was there. He dropped down to the floor on the pretext of getting something from the lower shelf, and I stood up in his place. He crawled into the corner of the bar and lit a cigarette, happy to remain there in silence until I had finished using his space. The bar where I found myself aspired to seediness. I knew that Raoul had discovered that the bar at the Hotel Astor had the annoying habit of cutting him off once he began to get sloppy, steering him back upstairs to his room. A few days ago he'd ventured out in search of greener pastures, and found the Newton Hotel, where they would pour drink down your throat until you ran out of coin. He'd remained slumped over the bar practically ever since, returning to the hotel room only to catch a few hours' sleep in the early mornings, and load his pockets with more coins for another day's drinking. I kept my masked face turned to the back of the bar while I listened to Meg try to convince a drunken Raoul to take Christine and Gustave and go back to France, preventing her from singing for me as she had planned. I was fairly certain that it had been a chance meeting between the two of them in the bar, but Meg had seized on the opportunity to bend his ear with assurances that I was about to turn Christine against him, for good this time. I shook my head. I was innocent of the despicable plotting she seemed to think me capable of. Hadn't I tried to make Christine do exactly as Meg urged, go home without singing for me? No, Christine's still being here was a direct result of her stubbornness, not mine. Meg seemed to think I had some undeniable power over Christine. I didn't know what to think about that. It was true that I had put myself into a position in the past where Christine was used to listening to me and heeding what I said. But the very fact that she was still here told me that she could stand up to me and deny me what I asked if she felt like it. It was almost a relief to see that she had the spine to do so. It meant that I didn't have to monitor myself so closely around her, afraid that she might take something I said too much to heart. Meg turned and fled the bar, having delivered her doom-filled message. And now to reintroduce myself, I thought with malicious glee. I had not yet had the pleasure of a conversation with the Vicomte. I turned around with a dramatic whirl, missing the swirl of my cloak around me. Raoul completely failed to notice, being slumped over the bar with his head on his arms. He slowly raised his head to demand another drink, but his demand died on his lips as his eyes traveled up my form and landed on my mask. The blood all drained from his drink-reddened face, and he slowly sat up. "You!" he spluttered. I wondered if he was going to take a swing at me. I certainly saw the thought cross his face. Then it passed, and he stood unsteadily and backed away from the bar. "No, not you. I'm dreaming. I must be." I dropped the bar rag I had been holding for show and strode out from behind the bar. Raoul continued to back away, desperate to keep as much space between us as possible. "I wonder," I began, "if you remember the last conversation I had the pleasure of having with you. I told you that if you didn't treat that woman like a queen, I would find you, kill you, and make her my own wife instead. It's been 10 years. And instead of a queen, I find a woman who seems mightily unsure of what her drunk of a husband might do next, and a child that seems likewise doubtful of whether or not you love him. It seems to me that the time has come to make good on my threat." I slid a hand inside my vest and watched this one small action completely undo my opponent. He raised his hands defensively and seemed to shrink before my very eyes. He began to plead, "No, don't. I didn't." No! I withdrew my empty hand from my vest, maintaining an innocent expression, but snickering inside at how my little trick had completely undone all his defenses. I folded my arms casually. I saw his glance dart to the door, and I moved myself to stand in front of it. Fortunately, I told him, I don't need to sully my hands. I can make Christine leave you without ever lifting a finger against you. She was on the verge of leaving you 10 years ago in favor of me and the music I write for her. But she had this idea that you could help her keep her father alive in her memory. From the sound of it, that's another thing you failed at. The look of realization on his face told me that he had never known that this was one of the reasons she had chosen him. I saw the memory of a million missed opportunities cross his face, followed by regret. She never said, he began. And you never bothered to find out, I rejoined. How hard would it have been to ask her one day why she was lost in thought, then watch her light up as you shared your own reminiscences of the man? I could see him seize on this plan and resolve to do exactly this in the future. I grudgingly gave him some credit for making a plan to fix his broken marriage, but I did not intend to give him time to execute it. He'd squandered his years with her. It was my time now. So here is my offer. One wager for your marriage. If Christine goes through with her performance, even now that she knows it was I who called her here, even with all her history of being afraid of me, if the call of my music can overcome all that, then you leave these shores alone. Christine stays with me, and we all live happily ever after. Oh, except for you, of course. Gustav may choose whether he wants to live with you or us. I really didn't want to make this concession, but I knew if I claimed the boy as well, Raoul would drag me through the courts to get his heir back. If the boy was going to live with Christine and I, it would have to be his choice. And if she cancels her performance? This clearly wasn't his first high-stakes wager, judging by the care he was taking to nail down all the terms, even in his drunken state. If she cancels, then you may all leave together with my blessing, and I'll pay off all your outstanding gambling debts. My research had revealed this to be just barely within my spending power. I knew that a full month's carnival income would see my bank balance securely back on the road to health, if I should have to make good on my wager. But I should add, you can't tell her of our bet. That would be cheating. His eyes widened as he understood for the first time the fortune I commanded here in the New World, and how it dwarfed even his own noble family's worth. I saw the common jealousy of the old money-impoverished man for the new money, freshly minted millionaire across his face. I smirked to myself as I watched him reevaluate me on the spot. He formally accepted my wager, then said, You really don't have a chance of winning this, monsieur. She and I have a son together. That's a bond that I don't imagine a childless man could comprehend, but it ties her to me. She'll do as I say, for the father of her son. He shoved past me, trying again to make for the door of the bar. I halted him in his tracks with 3 little words. Vous êtes certain? Are you sure? I sensed him stop as he absorbed all the implications of my question, then turned to watch him whirl on me unsteadily, spluttering and angry. I could see I had caught him off guard, and I pressed my advantage. Gustav is quite a musical child, isn't he? He really reminds me quite a lot of myself at that age. Wonder why that could be. Does he remind you of yourself at all, Vicomte? I must admit, I can't see anything of you in him. He was instantly angry, with the incoherent rage of the severely intoxicated. You're lying! No woman could ever... That's revolting. You mean... No! And then she kissed me. No! I became angry at his implication that he found her physically disagreeable now that he knew I had been with her. His intoxication was such that he had reacted with perfect honesty. I hadn't meant to make the relationship between them worse, but it seemed I might have. I had to be sure and win the wager now, or I'd have to let her leave with a husband that considered her soiled goods. That couldn't be a good situation for any woman. I moved in close to him and grabbed him by the throat, throwing him backwards over the bar. One of the bar stools in his path wobbled, then overbalanced and clattered to the floor. He finally took a good look at me as I stared him down, and his eyes were wide and fearful. I abruptly lost all my patience for this conversation. I summed it all up in preparation to depart. She cancels, your little family stays together. She sings, she's mine, as she should have been 10 years ago. Either way, you treat her with the respect and the care she deserves. That's it, monsieur. See you at the concert tonight. I released my grip, and he crumpled to the floor. I turned and walked out the door. I decided to try to sweeten the pot for Christine. I took my carriage to one of the jewelry stores that lined Fifth Avenue in the city. I thought I might buy her a necklace and earrings to wear on stage tonight. I stepped into the first jewelry store, only to realize I had no idea what color of gown Christine intended to wear for her performance. Rather than going all the way back to ask her, I decided that diamonds would have to do. Diamonds would go with anything. I wanted them mounted in silver or platinum to complement her porcelain skin. I went through 3 stores before I found a set large enough to be seen from anywhere in my concert hall, but that would not look oversized on her narrow frame. I allowed myself a pleasurable daydream of sliding my fingers around her neck, under her curls, to fasten the necklace for her. I paid the massive bill and pocketed the case containing the stones. I got back into my carriage and drove out to the carnival. When I got there, I went to the dressing room I had assigned to Christine. She was not there. I could hear her running her final check on the stage in the concert hall. I looked quickly around the dressing room to make sure everything was in place. There were fresh flowers in a vase on the dressing table, tied with black ribbon about the vase like that single rose I had left for her in Paris so long ago. Her gown hung on a hanger from the dressing screen in the corner. It was made of black satin with a stunningly low décolletage, and I congratulated myself on my choice of jewelry. Diamonds would show to perfection against the black. I placed the earrings prominently on the dressing table, where she would be sure to find them. I made a mental note to leave Squelch on guard at the door until she arrived and found them. I didn't want them to disappear into someone's pocket. I moved the padded chaise longue a little closer to the center of the room from its place in the corner. I didn't quite dare to let myself imagine what part it might play in the aftermath of Christine's performance, but I wanted it to be readily available to us. My watch read only an hour or so until she was scheduled to sing. I peeked onto the stage from the wings, only to see she had finished her check and was walking off the other side, heading back toward her dressing room. I turned round and followed her there. I did not knock at the door to her dressing room. Instead, I went to the small janitor's closet directly beside it and slipped inside. I manipulated the catch on the secret door I had built into the back of this room and slid it open to reveal the secret passageway I had constructed behind the dressing rooms in my concert hall. These dressing rooms were visible to the passageway through the large mirrors on the walls, as they had been in Paris. Here, however, the mirrors were not doorways, only windows. I got to the window looking into Christine's room just as she swung the door open and sailed inside. She dropped onto the chaise, fanning herself to cool herself down. I willed her to notice the pitcher of iced lemonade standing and perspiring on the dresser, and she did. rising to pour herself a glass. I knew the incandescent spotlights on my stage made one's time out there unbearably hot. I had tried to figure out how to create a current of cooling air across the stage without disturbing scenery pieces and hairstyles, but no answer had come to me yet. She set the glass down and turned her attention to the mirror. I held my breath, even though I knew she couldn't see me. She began to arrange her hair into the style she wanted, strand by curly strand. I watched her pin the final one in place, then reach for her cosmetics. Even though I recognized many of the steps she took with her brushes from the makeup routine I had been using to cover my scars, I was still inclined to consider the end result to be black magic. She looked at once more womanly and more innocent, more desirable and more unattainable, all at the same time. She shed her day dress, wrapping her beautiful body in a dressing gown until the last possible moment came to don the cumbersome black satin creation in the corner. Then she sat down at the dressing table and looked down to find the diamond earrings I had left her. She gasped, picked them up, and moved back to the mirror to insert them into the holes in her ears. I looked at her face as she did so, and noticed tears brimming in her eyes. She ran a finger over their sparkling brilliance as they hung from her lobes and whispered,
"Oh, Erik, they're beautiful."
She dried her eyes carefully so as not to disturb the layers of makeup. I didn't think she knew I was inside the mirror. She seemed more like she was talking to me wherever I might be at the moment. I relaxed. I was fairly certain my secret was still safe. A casual knock at the door heralded Raoul's arrival. He slipped inside, closed the door, and immediately began to make a big fuss about how good Christine looked. Christine smiled politely at his empty flattery and reciprocated, telling him he looked the same as he had 10 years before when he was dressed to the nines at the Paris Opera. While I would not have gone that far, he certainly seemed the best dressed, and the most sober, that I had seen him since his arrival in America. I wondered if he'd drunk another drop since I left him this morning. Somehow, I didn't think so. He knew he was playing for all the marbles now, and he wouldn't unnecessarily hamper his game with drink. He immediately turned off half the electric lights in the room, using the switches by the door, then sighed in relief. This indicated to me that he must have a massive headache caused by his consecutive nights of alcohol consumption, followed by the abrupt halt in his intake. Good, I thought spitefully. It was only to my advantage if he felt poorly. I listened to him as he paced the room, giving reason after reason why Christine should abandon her appearance and leave with him right that very moment. I was up to something. He, Raoul, was asking, wasn't that enough? Something sinister was going on here. She had no business exposing Gustave to such a seedy third-rate carnival atmosphere. He had changed their return tickets for a steamer departing that very evening, and they needed to leave now to make the sailing on time. Meg was unhappy that she, Christine, was taking the leading slot in this show, and she might try to sabotage Christine. This last one made me cock my head in interest. I had not until that moment considered how Meg might feel about being supplanted by Christine in the show. I had assumed that their previous friendship would carry them over this little irritation, with only a few ruffled feathers between them. But from the sound of it, Raoul was saying that Meg was highly disgruntled by the switch. I sighed, adding it to the list I carried in my head of actions of mine that one of the jury women disapproved of. After tonight, I might have to look into buying them out of my operations altogether. They had both become quite cold and distant with me, ever since I had told Meg once and for all that I would never be hers. I listened with horror as Christine agreed to her husband's demand and said she would leave with him. He kissed her fervently, then rose and left the room, intent on rounding up Gustav so they could leave. I touched the switch on the passage wall that locked the main dressing room door as soon as it latched behind him. She removed my earrings, rose to leave, realized she couldn't open the knob, and froze with her hand on it. The panic attack I half expected from her didn't materialize, which told me she had identified me as the culprit behind this latest bit of spookiness. I slid open the wall panel and stepped inside the dressing room. She whirled on hearing me, and immediately pulled her dressing gown further closed around herself. I spoke to her in a low voice, reminding her that she had come all this way for the adoration of my American audiences, and they would love her. I sang bits of my music to her and watched her sigh as she remembered each piece I had written especially for her. I beckoned her over to stand in front of me at the mirror, and when she finally complied, I reached into my pocket for the necklace I had bought for her. I held it between my two hands, dropped it over her head, and fastened it behind her neck. I brushed her shoulders as I dropped my hands, and bent my head to kiss her on the shoulder. She turned from me then, and sat back down at the dressing table. I picked up the earrings and put them into her hand again, but she merely held them, seemingly afraid to put them on and complete the jewelry set. "Christine, you said you would sing my music for me. I really want to hear you sing it. Think of how great it will feel to stand on that stage, feeling the thrum of the orchestra through your feet, just as you did for me on that stage in Paris so long ago. This song is a culmination of our relationship, Christine. It goes farther to explain how we feel about one another than anything we have ever said to one another with mere words. It is as much an expression of my love for you as your carrying and raising Gustav was an expression of your love for me. I beg of you, please, present it to the world on my behalf." I left her then, having run out of ways to convince her. The wager was entirely in her delicate hands now. As I closed the wall panel behind me, she was still sitting at her dressing table with my earrings clutched in her hand. I pressed the switch to unlock her door and exited out through the janitor's closet again, going to find a space in the wings to stand and watch her sing. The performance was about to start.